Honestly, what is a civilian doing out here? This is a closed evaluation. Go back to the observation tent before you get your pretty little hiking boots dirty. The words, slick with the easy arrogance of a young man who had never been truly tested, sliced through the damp, chilled air. The circle of cadets, their faces smeared with camouflage paint and fatigue, chuckled nervously. They were exhausted, soaked from a relentless drizzle that had turned the training grounds of the prestigious West Point Military Academy into a sprawling canvas of mud and misery. And Cadet Captain Marcus Evans offered a welcome, if cruel, distraction. He was their leader, the top of their class, a man sculpted from ego and Academy-approved doctrine. His target was a woman standing silently at the edge of their bivouac, a figure so unassuming she seemed almost an apparition against the grim backdrop of pine and rock. She wore simple khaki cargo pants, a plain black rain shell, and a small, functional day pack. No rank, no insignia, no indication that she was anything other than what Evans had assumed. A lost civilian, perhaps a sociologist or reporter who had wandered into the heart of their final and most grueling field exercise, a 72-hour ordeal known only as the Gauntlet. The woman offered no reaction. Her gaze, a calm and steady gray, did not waver from the complex rope bridge the cadets were attempting to construct over a deep, rain-swollen ravine. Her stillness was a stark contrast to the jittery energy of the cadets, their movements made clumsy by cold and stress. But when the Academy's commandant, Admiral Vance, saw her stance from his distant command post monitor, he saw something else entirely. He saw a posture of perfect, relaxed readiness, a center of gravity so low and balanced it was less a stance and more a state of being. He saw a ghost from a world of shadows and whispers, a world Marcus Evans couldn't even imagine. If you believe that true competence needs no introduction and that respect is earned in silence, type professional below. For the woman, the insult was less than the buzz of a mosquito, a meaningless noise in a symphony of more important data. The rising pitch of the wind through the trees, the telltale sag in the primary anchor line of the cadets' bridge, the subtle shift in barometric pressure that promised this drizzle would soon become a deluge. Her name was Anna Reed, and she was an observer, a consultant brought in to assess the Academy's updated training protocols. Her file was thin, almost comically so. It listed a degree in structural engineering and a decade of private sector work with a firm specializing in remote logistical solutions. It was a masterpiece of bureaucratic camouflage, designed to be overlooked, to be dismissed. Evans, emboldened by her silence, took a step closer, puffing out his chest. "Hey, I'm talking to you. This is a restricted military area. We're dealing with complex rigging systems here. It's dangerous. You wouldn't understand." He gestured vaguely at the chaos of ropes and carabiners, his tone dripping with condescension, the kind a boy uses when explaining something to a girl. Anna's eyes finally shifted from the bridge to him. There was no anger, no fear, no indignation. There was only a quiet, analytical focus, as if she were studying an interesting but non-threatening species of insect. She gave a single, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture of acknowledgement that somehow carried more weight than any shouted retort. Then, her gaze returned to the failing anchor line, her focus absolute. The quiet dismissal, the sheer lack of engagement, was more infuriating to Evans than any argument could have been. It was a silent refutation of his authority, of his very presence. He felt a hot flush of embarrassment creep up his neck. He was Cadet Captain Evans. He was destined for great things. He would not be ignored by some random woman in hiking gear. He turned to his team, his voice a little too loud. "All right, let's get this done. The brass is watching. Let's show them how real soldiers operate. Not like some of these civilian spectators, the cadets, eager to please, redoubled their efforts, pulling and tying with a renewed but unfocused vigor, their movements sloppy, their attention fractured. They wanted to impress him. They wanted to impress the distant, unseen eyes of their evaluators. And in their haste, in their desperate need for validation, they missed the small, critical details. They missed the fraying on the rope where it scraped against a sharp rock edge. They missed the way the primary piton was slowly, agonizingly working its way loose from the saturated earth. Anna Reed missed nothing. She remained perfectly still, a silent sentinel at the edge of the clearing, her mind a cold calculus of load-bearing capacities, tensile strengths, and the ever-increasing probability of catastrophic failure. The rain began to fall harder, washing the smirks from the cadets' faces and replacing them with a grim determination. The wind howled, a mournful counterpoint to Evan's sharp, barking orders. The universe was setting a stage, preparing a crucible far more real than any training exercise could ever be, and it was about to ask a question. The question was not about doctrine or rank or arrogance. It was about competence, and the answer was standing silently in the rain, waiting. The air grew heavy, thick with the smell of wet earth and ozone. Marcus Evans, standing with his hands on his hips in a posture of command he'd copied from war movies, felt a surge of pride. The one-rope bridge was almost complete. It was a testament to his leadership, his ability to motivate his team under pressure. He saw the exercise proctors observing from a ridge a few hundred meters away, their binoculars pointed in his direction. This was his moment, the culmination of 4 years of relentless effort. He would be the one they wrote about in their evaluations, the standout leader of his class. He glanced over at the civilian woman Reed. She was still there, a statue of infuriating calm. He wanted to yell at her again, to finally break that placid composure, but a sudden, sharp crack, like a rifle shot, split the air. It was followed by a sickening, grinding groan of tortured metal and stressed rope. The primary anchor piton, the one he himself had ordered driven into the shale rock face, ripped free from the ground in a spray of mud and stone. The entire bridge structure, a complex web of rope and webbing, shuddered violently. Cadet Miller, the lightest of the team, was halfway across, suspended 100 feet above the churning, rock-strewn water of the ravine. He screamed, a thin, terrified sound that was almost swallowed by the wind. The main line sagged catastrophically, dropping him a terrifying 20 feet before another anchor, now bearing a load it was never meant to hold, began to groan in protest. Panic erupted. Cadets who had been models of military bearing moments before were now just scared kids, shouting, pointing, running in circles. Their training, so clean and precise on paper, evaporated in the face of genuine, life-threatening chaos. Evans froze. His mind, usually a sharp repository of field manual procedures, was a blank slate of white noise. All his confidence, all his carefully constructed authority, shattered into a million pieces. He could only stare, mouth agape, at Miller, who was now dangling helplessly, spinning slowly on the end of the line. "Do something," someone screamed. But no one knew what to do. The secondary anchor was visibly failing. Any attempt to pull Miller back would likely cause it to fail completely, sending him plunging to the rocks below. Cutting him loose was unthinkable. They were trapped by their own incompetence, paralyzed by the sudden, brutal reality of their failure. And then, through the chaos, there was movement. It was quiet, economical, and utterly purposeful. Anna Reed moved from the tree lean into the clearing. She didn't run. She moved with a ground-eating stride that was both fast and perfectly balanced. The cadets barely registered her presence until she was at the secondary anchor point, her hands already moving with a practiced, fluid grace. She didn't speak. She didn't issue orders. She simply acted. Her pack was on the ground, unzipped, and its contents laid out on a small waterproof sheet before anyone even realized she had taken it off. It wasn't the gear of a hiker. It was a curated collection of professional-grade equipment, specialized pulleys, ascenders, Prusik loops, and lengths of high-tech cordage, all meticulously organized. Evans finally found his voice, a weak, stammering shadow of its former authority. "Wait, you can't. You're not authorized." His words died in his throat as she completely ignored him. Her focus was absolute. Her hands, which he had imagined were soft and uncalloused, moved with the unthinking precision of a master craftsman. She worked on the failing anchor, not by trying to reinforce it, but by building a new, redundant system around it. She looped a length of cord around the base of a thick, ancient oak tree, her fingers tying a series of knots so complex and yet so perfectly symmetrical that they looked like something out of a textbook. a textbook no one at this academy had ever read. She worked with a silent, rhythmic intensity. There was no wasted motion, no hesitation. Every action flowed into the next. She was a surgeon in an operating theater, a bomb disposal expert defusing a device, a creature of pure, undiluted competence. The other cadets had stopped panicking. They were now watching her, their expressions a mixture of confusion and burgeoning awe. They had never seen anything like it. Their own training was based on brute force and following orders. Her movements were different. They were elegant, efficient, a form of physical problem-solving that was more like an art form. She clipped a pulley on her new anchor, ran a new line through it, and attached it to the main bridge line with an en-bloc clip, a piece of equipment none of them had ever seen before. The entire process took less than 90 seconds. 90 seconds of deafening silence, broken only by the howl of the wind and the terrified whimpers of Cadet Miller. In that silence, a new hierarchy was being established, one not based on rank or bluster, but on the simple, undeniable evidence of ability. The woman Evans had dismissed, the civilian he had ridiculed, was now the single point of order in a universe of chaos. She was in complete control. With the new, redundant anchor system in place, the immediate danger of a total collapse was averted. The groaning of the failing secondary piton ceased as the load was masterfully redistributed to the unyielding oak tree. Cadet Miller still hung, suspended over the chasm, but the line holding him was now stable. A collective sigh of relief passed through the watching cadets, a quiet exhalation of breath they didn't realize they'd been holding. But the problem wasn't solved. Miller was hypothermic, dangling in the wind and rain, and still 100 feet from safety. The bridge itself was a tangled, useless wreck. The challenge had shifted from preventing a catastrophe to executing a rescue. Evans, his face pale and slick with rain, finally managed to reboot his brain. He began shouting orders, falling back on the procedures he had memorized. "Okay, team, we need a retrieval line. Get the Stokes litter. Someone rig a Z-drag pulley system." His voice was strained, a desperate attempt to reclaim the authority that had so completely slipped from his grasp. His team, however, no longer looked to him. Their eyes were fixed on Anna Reed. She hadn't acknowledged Evans' orders. She was already working, her focus narrowed to the task at hand. She pulled a length of lightweight, impossibly strong rope from her pack. It was Dyneema, a material far more advanced than the standard-issue nylon ropes the Academy used. She tied one end to her own harness, her fingers a blur as she fashioned a perfect figure-8 follow-through. She clipped in a descender and, without a word, walked to the edge of the ravine. She was going out there herself. "Stop!" Evans yelled, a genuine note of panic in his voice now. "That's a direct violation of protocol. You're not on the roster. You're a civilian. You can't." His protest was cut short by a sound he had never heard before on a training ground. The unmistakable, authoritative chop of a Black Hawk helicopter descending through the low clouds. It wasn't one of the Academy's standard training birds. It was painted a flat, non-reflective black, and it bore no markings. It swept over the ravine, the downdraft whipping the trees and cadets into a frenzy, and settled into a perfect, rock-steady hover directly over their position. A figure in a flight suit leaned out of the open door, giving a thumbs-up not to the cadets, but directly to Anna. She gave a curt nod in return, a silent exchange of professional understanding that excluded everyone else. The cadets stared dumbfounded. This was an unscheduled, unannounced intervention of a level they couldn't comprehend. This was not part of the exercise. This was something else. Anna didn't wait. She leaned back, her body perfectly perpendicular to the cliff face, and began to walk down the sheer rock wall, her descent smooth and controlled. She moved like a spider, using the smallest of footholds, her body a study in balance and strength. It was a display of technical rock climbing skill that would have been impressive in a climbing gym with safety mats. Here, on a slick, rain-lashed cliff face, it was breathtaking. She reached the dangling, terrified Cadet Miller in under a minute. She spoke to him, her voice calm and even audible now in a lull in the wind. "Aimanna, I'm going to get you out of here. Just breathe." She worked quickly, securing him to her own harness, her movements sure and practiced, even while suspended 100 feet in the air. She produced a small pair of trauma shears and, with a single decisive snip, cut him free from the tangled mess of the bridge. For a heart-stopping moment, they were both held only by her rope, swinging slightly in the wind. Above them, the black helicopter lowered a hoist. Anna attached Miller to it first, then herself. The winch engaged, and they were lifted smoothly, inexorably, into the sky. As the helicopter banked and climbed away, the cadets were left standing in the mud, staring at the empty space where their teammate and the strange civilian woman had been. The clearing was suddenly, profoundly silent. The wind died down. The rain softened to a whisper. All that remained was the wreckage of their bridge and the wreckage of their pride. The sound of their own failure was deafening. Evans stood frozen, rain dripping from his chin. The entire event, from the anchor's failure to the helicopter's departure, had lasted less than 10 minutes. In those 10 minutes, his entire world, his understanding of competence, of authority, of his own place in the universe, had been turned upside down. The woman he had mocked, the civilian he had dismissed as a soft irrelevance, had just executed a flawless high-angle rope rescue and extraction with the support of an unmarked special operations helicopter, all without raising her voice or breaking a sweat. It wasn't just that she was competent. It was the nature of her competence. It was quiet, absolute, and utterly indifferent to his opinion. It was a force of nature. The word impossible echoed in his mind, a hollow, repeating drumbeat. That's not possible. No civilian could do that. No one he knew could do that. The silence stretched, a heavy blanket of shared shock and shame. The other cadets looked at Evans, but not for orders. They looked at him with a new expression in their eyes, a dawning, uncomfortable pity. His arrogance hadn't just been foolish. It had been revealed as a profound and dangerous ignorance. The chasm in front of them was nothing compared to the gulf of skill that separated them from the woman who had just saved their friend's life. The silence that followed was a living entity. It pressed in on the cadets, filling their ears more completely than the previous cacophony of wind and panic. It was a silence composed of shame, awe, and 1,000 unanswered questions. They stood like statues in the mud, their half-built bridge a monument to their failure, their eyes either fixed on the empty sky or the ground at their feet. Marcus Evans felt as though the world had tilted on its axis. The rigid hierarchy that had defined his existence for 4 years had dissolved. He was cadet captain, the best of the best, yet in the moment of crisis, his rank, his knowledge, his very identity had been utterly useless. He had frozen, then blustered, a child shouting into a hurricane. The woman, Reed, had simply acted. She hadn't asked for permission. She hadn't asserted her authority. She had just solved the problem. The sound of heavy boots crunching on the wet gravel of the nearby access road broke the spell. 2 figures emerged from the mist-shrouded trees. One was the senior exercise proctor, a stern-faced major whose expression was unreadable. The other was a man who needed no introduction. Admiral Vance, the commandant of the academy, a living legend who had commanded fleets and walked the halls of the Pentagon, was here, in the mud, at their failed training site. His presence was like a sudden drop in temperature. Every cadet, Evans included, snapped to attention, their bodies ramrod straight, their faces a mask of formal terror. Admiral Vance didn't look at them. He didn't even glance at the ruined bridge. His piercing blue eyes, accustomed to scanning vast ocean horizons, swept the clearing until they found Evans. Vance walked slowly, deliberately, until he was standing directly in front of the cadet captain. He was not a tall man, but his presence seemed to suck the very air from the space around him. He said nothing for a long, agonizing moment. He simply looked at Evans, and in that look, Evans felt the full weight of his failure. "Report, cadet." Vance's voice was quiet, almost conversational, but it carried the cold, hard authority of a lifetime of command. Evans swallowed hard, his throat dry. "Sir, at 1400 hours, during the one-rope bridge construction phase of the exercise, we experienced a primary anchor failure." Cadet Miller was on the line. The situation became unstable. "Sir," he couldn't bring himself to say the word failed. The situation became unstable. Vance repeated, his voice flat. And then what happened, Evans? Evans hesitated. Sir, a civilian observer. Intervened, a civilian observer, Vance said, the words hanging in the air. He turned his head slightly toward the Major. Major, would you please pull up the file on our civilian observer? The structural engineer, a Ms. Anna Reed. The Major produced a ruggedized military tablet, his fingers tapping on the screen. He angled it so Vance could see. The Admiral stared at the screen for a moment, though his expression suggested he already knew exactly what he would find. Then, he looked back at Evans, and for the first time, there was a flicker of something other than disappointment in his eyes. It was a cold, hard fire, the look of a teacher about to deliver a lesson that would never be forgotten. Cadets, Vance said, his voice now rising, projecting across the clearing to every listening ear. You are here to learn how to lead. The first principle of leadership, the one upon which all others are built, is the ability to make an accurate assessment of the resources at your disposal. You must learn to see the world as it is, not as your assumptions tell you it should be. He paused, letting the words sink in. Cadet Evans, you assessed the situation today, and you saw a civilian. You saw a woman. You saw pretty little hiking boots. Your assumptions were loud, arrogant, and catastrophically wrong. He gestured to the tablet in the Major's hand. Let me tell you what you failed to see. He took a breath, and then he began to read, his voice a steady, rhythmic cadence of revelation that hammered down on the assembled cadets. Name, Anna Reed. Acknowledged, but not her real name. That's classified. A murmur went through the cadets. Last official rank, Master Chief Petty Officer, United States Navy. Service branch, Naval Special Warfare Development Group. The name hit the clearing like a physical blow. DevGru, SEAL Team 6, the most elite, secretive, and lethal fighting force in the United States military. It was a unit spoken of in hushed, reverent whispers. The idea that this quiet, unassuming woman was not just a SEAL, but Master Chief from their most legendary unit, was so far beyond their comprehension that it bordered on the absurd. But the Admiral was just getting started. Admiral Vance continued, his voice like chipping stone, each word a chisel carving a new reality into the minds of the stunned cadets. Years of service, 14. Active duty, all within Naval Special Warfare. She was one of the first women to ever pass the BUD/S selection course, part of a quiet pilot program the Pentagon still won't officially acknowledge. She didn't just pass. She finished in the top 5 of her class. He let that statement hang in the air, a direct and brutal refutation of every assumption about gender and capability that men like Evans had ever harbored. The cadets' faces were a gallery of shock. They were looking at a ghost, a myth made real. Combat déploiement, 12. All to environments designated as extremely hazardous/non-permissive. The specific locations are, of course, classified. The number of mission hours she has logged in hostile territory is greater than the total number of hours everyone in your class has spent in uniform. Vance looked up from the tablet, his eyes boring into Evans. You were concerned about her getting her boots dirty. Master Chief Reed has spent more time living in mud and filth and conditions you can't even imagine than you have spent in your comfortable dormitory bed. The mud is her home. He returned his gaze to the screen, his tone growing even more severe. Specializations, Master Breacher, Lead Combat Climber, Advanced Special Operations Combat Medic. She is qualified to perform surgical procedures in the field. She is an expert in unconventional warfare, counterterrorism, and high-threat personnel extraction. The technique she used to stabilize your failed anchor isn't in any of your field manuals because it's a proprietary NSW climbing team technique for high-angle mountain rescues in the Hindu Kush. She probably invented it. A wave of cold realization washed over Evans. The helicopter, the unmarked, blacked-out helicopter that had appeared from nowhere. It wasn't a random Academy asset. It was hers. It was her people, her unit, on standby, ready to support one of their own. She hadn't called for help. She had simply signaled that she was engaging, and they had come. It was a level of operational integration and trust that was utterly foreign to the rigid, formal world of the Academy. Vance scrolled down the screen. Notable awards, Silver Star. for gallantry in action against an enemy of the United States. 2 Bronze Stars with V4 Valor. The Purple Heart, the Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal. The list, Cadets, goes on for 3 pages. He swiped the screen off and looked at the assembled young men and women. His voice dropped, becoming quiet and intensely personal. We brought Master Chief Reed here as a consultant, under a civilian cover, for a very specific reason. We wanted to see if you, the next generation of leaders, had learned the most important lesson of the last 20 years of war. We wanted to see if you could recognize lethality, competence, and authority when it wasn't wearing the uniform you expected. If you could see the warrior and not the woman. He took a step closer to Evans, his voice now a bare whisper that was somehow more powerful than any shout. You failed, Cadet. You failed utterly. You stood in the presence of quiet, demonstrated royalty, a true master of our profession, and all you saw was a target for your own insecurity. You didn't just disrespect a civilian. You disrespected a living legend of the United States Navy. You disrespected a woman who has bled for the very flag on your shoulder. He stepped back. Then, in a gesture that sent a shockwave through the entire group, Admiral Vance, a 3-star flag officer, turned to face the direction the helicopter had flown. He brought his hand up in the sharpest, most formal salute of his life. It was a salute of profound respect, a gesture from one warrior to another, bridging the gap between rank, service, and gender. It was a salute to the unseen, unassuming Master Chief. He held it for a full 5 seconds, his back rigid, his expression grim. When he dropped it, he turned back to the cadets. Your exercise is terminated. You will all return to the barracks. Reflect on what you saw here today. Reflect on the difference between the noise of arrogance and the silence of competence. He looked directly at Evans one last time. You, Cadet, have an appointment in my office. 0600 tomorrow. Be prepared to explain why you still deserve to be in my academy. With that, he turned and walked away, the Major falling in step behind him, leaving the cadets alone in the mud with the ruins of their bridge and the heavy, suffocating weight of their lesson. The story of what happened at the ravine, of Cadet Captain Evans' humiliation and the quiet woman's impossible skill, did not just spread through the academy. It detonated. It moved faster than official reports, carried on waves of whispered gossip through the mess halls, the barracks, the gyms, and the hallowed library halls. It became an instant legend, a piece of institutional folklore passed from cadet to cadet with a mixture of awe and disbelief. Within hours, everyone knew. They knew about the anchor failure, about Evans freezing, about the unmarked Black Hawk, and about the quiet civilian observer who was, in fact, a Devgrim Master Chief. The tale was embellished with each telling, her skills growing more and more supernatural, until Anna Reed was less a person and more a force of nature, a warrior spirit sent to test the unworthy. The Academy's culture, a rigid structure built on the clear-cut lines of rank and protocol, was subtly but permanently altered. A new, unspoken variable had been introduced, the possibility that true expertise could exist outside the established hierarchy, hidden in plain sight. Cadets began to look at each other differently, at their instructors, even at the civilian groundskeepers and cafeteria staff, with a new hint of questioning respect. The phrase, "Don't pull an Evans," became instant academy slang for making an arrogant, ignorant assumption. It was used as a sharp, quick corrective for any cadet who got too loud, too boastful, too certain of their own superiority. The phrase was a constant, humbling reminder of what had happened. For Marcus Evans, the experience was a crucible that burned away the dross of his arrogance, leaving behind something harder, quieter, and more genuine. His meeting with Admiral Vance was as brutal as he had expected. He wasn't expelled, but he was stripped of his rank as cadet captain and placed on academic and disciplinary probation. He was forced to write a detailed after-action report, not just on the technical failures of the bridge exercise, but on his own personal failures of leadership and judgment. It was the hardest thing he had ever had to write. But the Admiral's true punishment was not disciplinary. It was educational. Evans was reassigned. His new duty, for the remainder of the semester, was to be Ms. Reed's personal liaison. He was to carry her gear, facilitate her access to training areas, and essentially serve as her shadow while she completed her evaluation of the Academy's protocols. It was a position of profound and public humility. The first time he reported to her, he found her not in an office, but in the Academy's cavernous gear locker, meticulously inspecting the cadets climbing ropes. He stood before her, his posture stiff, his eyes fixed on a point on the wall behind her head. "Ma'am," he began, his voice cracking slightly. Cadet Evans reporting as ordered. Anna didn't look up from the rope she was examining. She ran a section of it through her bare hands, feeling for the telltale fraying of the inner core. "The core shot on this one," she said, her voice even and technical. She coiled the rope and tossed it into a discard pile. "It should have been decommissioned 100 hours ago." She finally looked at him. There was no triumph in her eyes, no "I told you so." There was just the same calm, analytical focus he had seen at the ravine. "Your primary anchor piton," she said, "you placed it in shale. Shale flakes under tensile load. You should have looked for granite. There was a solid granite outcrop 10 feet to your left." It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact, a clinical diagnosis of his failure. Evan swallowed. "Yes, ma'am. I see that now." "Good," she said, and turned back to the ropes. Seeing is the first step. Over the next few weeks, Evans learned more about leadership from Anna Reid's silence than he had from 4 years of textbooks. He watched her. He watched how she observed, how she listened, how she moved. She never spoke unless she had something vital to say, and when she did, her words were precise and stripped of all ego. She taught him how to inspect a carabiner for microfractures, how to read the weather from the cloud formations over the mountains, how to pack a medical kit for maximum efficiency. She never once mentioned the incident at the ravine. She didn't have to. It was the silent, unspoken context for every interaction they had. He saw her treat the lowest-ranking cadet with the same quiet respect she showed the highest-ranking instructor. He saw her stop to help a groundskeeper fix a broken sprinkler head, her knowledge of hydraulics apparently as deep as her knowledge of combat rigging. Her competence was not a performance. It was a fundamental state of being. The symbolic artifact of the event appeared a month later. Pinned to the main bulletin board in the Cadet Union, a place usually reserved for official announcements, was a single, high-resolution photograph. It was a still frame from the proctor's video feed of the rescue. It showed Anna, suspended in mid-air, her body a portrait of calm control as she attached the terrified Cadet Miller to the rescue hoist. Someone had anonymously added a small, typed caption at the bottom. The difference between talking the talk and walking the walk. The photo became a silent sermon, a permanent fixture that every cadet saw every single day. The ravine itself was unofficially renamed. Cadets started calling it Reid's Ravine, and the name stuck. It was no longer just a training location. It was a landmark, a place of pilgrimage where a vital lesson had been brutally and beautifully taught. The transformation of Marcus Evans was not loud or dramatic. It was a quiet, internal recalibration. The arrogant, swaggering cadet captain was gone, replaced by a more thoughtful, observant, and profoundly humbled young man. He stopped talking about his own accomplishments and started asking questions. He became a listener. His fellow cadets, who had once followed him out of sense of obligation and a desire to be associated with a winner, now began to seek his advice for a different reason. They saw in him a newfound gravity, a seriousness born from a genuine and public failure. He had been to the brink and returned with a wisdom that none of their successes could ever teach them. He spent hours in the library, not studying tactics, but geology, meteorology, and engineering. He wanted to understand the why behind the procedures, the fundamental principles Anna Reid seemed to embody so effortlessly. One afternoon, he found her alone in a classroom, reviewing architectural plans for a new urban combat training facility. He stood at the door for a moment, then knocked quietly. She looked up and nodded for him to enter. "Ma'am," he began, "I've been studying the after-action report." "My report? There's something I don't understand." She raised an eyebrow, her attention still partially on the blueprints. "The knot you used for the primary anchor on the oak tree," Evans said. "It's not in the Navy SEAL Tactical Field Guide. It's not in any Army manual either. I've looked everywhere. It looks like a variation of a tensionless hitch, but the redundancy loop is different for the first time." Evans saw something flicker in her eyes, a brief, almost imperceptible spark of professional interest. She put down the blueprints. It's called a Valdetaine tresse, she said. It's a French alpine knot. We adapted it. The standard military hitches can bind under extreme load, especially with wet ropes. This one distributes the friction, making it releasable even after it's held a multi-ton load. She picked up a short length of practice rope from the table and, with movements too fast for him to follow, tied the knot. It was a beautiful, intricate braid of rope, a perfect marriage of physics and form. She handed it to him. The book only gives you the approved answer, she said, her voice quiet. The problem gives you the right answer. Your job is to know the difference. Evans looked at the knot in his hand. It was more than just rope. It was a symbol of a deeper knowledge, a world of expertise that existed beyond the rigid confines of his formal education. It was a lesson in humility he could hold in his hand. "Thank you, ma'am," he said, his voice thick with a sincerity she had never heard from him before. He spent the next week practicing the knot until his fingers were raw, until he could tie it in the dark with one hand in under 5 seconds. He wasn't just learning a knot. He was internalizing a philosophy. The story of Reed's Ravine became a core part of the Academy's institutional narrative. Instructors used it as a case study in leadership classes. They would play the video from the proctor's camera, the anchor failure, Evan's paralysis, and then Anna's silent, methodical, and brutally efficient response. The lesson was always the same. Assumptions are a liability. Competence is quiet. Respect is a verb. Anna Reed completed her evaluation and left the academy as quietly as she had arrived. There was no formal farewell, no ceremony. One day, she was there, a silent presence in the background of their lives, and the next she was gone. But she left an indelible mark. She had changed the institution not by giving a lecture or writing a report, but through a single, undeniable act of professional mastery. She had held up a mirror to the academy and to Marcus Evans, forcing them to confront the dangerous gap between their perception of strength and the reality of it. The photo on the bulletin board remained. It became a touchstone. Cadets on their way to difficult exams would touch the corner of the frame for good luck. Fourth-year cadets would bring the new plebes to stand before it and tell them the story, passing the legend down. They would point to the calm figure of Anna Reed, suspended over the abyss, and they would point to the blurred, panicked faces of the cadets on the ground. That, they would say, is the difference between a title and a trade. Remember it, the legend became a living part of their code, a permanent warning against the seductive poison of arrogance. A year passed, the seasons turned, and a new class of cadets walked the hallowed grounds of the academy, their faces fresh with ambition and a carefully projected confidence. They were marching toward the same training area, toward the ravine that was now marked on all their training maps, not by its official designation, but simply as Reed's Ravine. Their instructor walked beside them, his posture relaxed but his eyes missing nothing. He was no longer a cadet, but a newly commissioned second lieutenant, granted a probationary assignment as a junior instructor at the academy, a rare and telling posting. It was Marcus Evans. He was leaner. His face had lost its boyish arrogance, and in its place was a quiet authority that his former self would not have recognized. He brought the column of cadets to a halt at the edge of the chasm, the same spot where he had stood and watched his world unravel a year ago. The wind blew, carrying the same scent of pine and damp earth. "All right, listen up," Evans said, his voice calm and clear, easily carrying over the breeze. He didn't shout. He no longer needed to. The cadets gathered around him, their attention absolute. "You're standing at a place that's important to this academy," he began. "This is where we teach one of the most important lessons you will ever learn here. It's not about rigging. It's not about tactics. It's about respect." He pointed to the far side of the ravine, to a massive, ancient oak tree. "A year ago, on this very spot, my team and I were in the final phase of the gauntlet. We were the best in our class. We were arrogant. We were loud. And we were wrong." He then told them the story. He spared no detail of his own failure. He described his condescending words to the unassuming civilian observer. He recounted his own paralysis, the sheer, white-hot panic that had gripped him when the anchor failed. He told them about her silence, her methodical calm, her absolute competence in the face of their chaos. He described the Valdetaine tresse knot, the unmarked helicopter, the crushing weight of Admiral Vance's words. He told the story not as a distant legend, but as a personal confession, a testament to his own profound ignorance. The new cadets listened, their expressions rapt. This was not a dry lecture from a textbook. This was real. This was a story of failure and redemption, told by the man who had lived it. The woman who saved my teammate's life that day, Evans continued, his voice dropping slightly, was Master Chief Anna Reed of the Naval Special Warfare Development Group. She was one of the greatest warriors this country has ever produced, but you wouldn't have known it by looking at her. She wore no rank. She had no medals on her chest. She demanded no special treatment. Her competence was her uniform. Her actions were her rank. He looked each of the new cadets in the eye. You will encounter people like her in your careers. They will not always look like you expect. They will not always fit the mold. They will be the quiet ones in the back of the room. They will be the ones who listen more than they talk. They will be the ones who have nothing to prove because they have already proven it in places you will never see, on missions you will never know about. Your job, your sacred duty as leaders, is to have the wisdom to see them, to listen to them. It was about the lessons that live on after you're gone, the changes you inspire in others, the standards you set through silent, perfect execution. Anna Reed had never sought to leave a legacy at the academy. She had simply done her job. But in doing so, she had left behind something more powerful than any monument, a permanent, institutionalized respect for quiet competence. True strength is a silent language. It is not spoken in the thunder of boasts or the lightning of threats, but in the quiet, steady rhythm of action. It is the language of the professional, the dialect of the master, a grammar understood only by those who have put in the work, paid the price, and earned the right to stand calm in the heart of the storm. The world is full of noise, a constant clamor for attention, for validation, for recognition. People shout their qualifications from the rooftops, plaster their accomplishments across every available surface, believing that the volume of their voice is a measure of their worth. They mistake confidence for competence, arrogance for authority. They build their houses on the sand of assumption, believing that appearance is reality, that the uniform makes the soldier, that the title makes the leader. But the truth, the deep and abiding truth of the world, is that the most dangerous forces are often the most silent. The pressure building along a fault line, the turning of a tide, the inexorable approach of a storm front. These are forces that do not announce their arrival. They simply arrive. So, it is with true human capability. The master craftsman does not need to tell you he is a master. The proof is in the perfect joint of the wood. The master surgeon does not need to list her credentials. The proof is in the steady hand that holds the scalpel and the life that is saved. And the master warrior does not need to wear her medals. The proof is in the unnerving calm in her eyes, the economy of her motion, the way she sees the world not as a stage for her ego, but as a complex problem to be solved with precision and discipline. Arrogance is a debt owed to insecurity. It is a loud, desperate advertisement for a product that is not yet finished, not yet tested, not yet proven. It is the brittle armor of the amateur. Competence, however, is a currency that is self-validating. It needs no advertisement because its value is inherent. It is the quiet confidence of the professional who has faced the crucible and emerged not unscathed, but stronger, tempered by the fire of real-world experience. The story of what happened at that ravine is not just about a cadet and a master chief. It is a parable for our time. It is a reminder that we must learn to look past the superficial, to listen to the silence, to judge people not by the noise they make, but by the undeniable evidence of their actions. We must cultivate the wisdom to recognize the quiet professional, to create a culture where their skills are valued, their voices are heard, and their contributions are honored. For these are the people who will hold the line when the anchor fails. They are the ones who will build the redundant system while others are panicking. They are the ones who will, without a word, step off the ledge and walk into the storm to get the job done. Legacy is not what is written on your tombstone. It is what is written into the hearts and minds of those you have influenced. It is the standard that continues after you are gone, the lesson that is passed down from one generation to the next. Anna Reed left no statue, no plaque with her name on it. Her legacy was a quiet, profound, and permanent change in the way a new generation of leaders saw the world. It was a legacy of silence, a testament to the enduring power of demonstrated professional competence. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud arrogance and where silent professionalism defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Tales.